In this video, we're going to look at how to use the new Amplify admin UI to build a backend for a Next.js frontend. The Next.js app is going to be a blogging app with a detail view and a list view. So we'll have a list of posts, and then we want to drill down into the detail. And this is going to be built using static site generation. So we're going to be using SSG, but we're also going to be taking advantage of SSR by implementing fallback routes and revalidation. So hopefully you get a good idea of how to build with the new Amplify admin UI. This is going to be a fairly short video. We're going to try to keep it at less than 30 minutes. So I hope you learn a lot and you kind of build something based on what you learned here today. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing I'm going to do is go ahead into my terminal and create a new Next app. And while that is creating, we'll go ahead and jump into the web browser. And from here, we'll go ahead and go to the AWS console and we will jump into AWS Amplify. So here in the console, I will search for AWS Amplify. And here, when we load up the Amplify console, in the menu, we now have this new link for creating an app backend. This only used to exist for creating a front end, so this is kind of new. So for the backend, we want to say something like next blog, and then we will click confirm deployment to go ahead and deploy the backend. Now, this is going to kind of deploy our Amplify app. We still need to go in and model our data, and we'll do that in just a second. But for now, let's go ahead and change into our new Amplify blog. This is our next app. Maybe we'll open it up in our text editor and get that ready because we're going to be writing some code, of course, in just a moment. And we'll also go ahead and install whatever dependencies that we're going to need. Now, we're going to be allowing users to create blog posts using Markdown, so we'll install React Markdown. And we'll also install AWS Amplify. AWS Amplify, whoops, I need to add the add in there. So with the AWS Amplify, these are just going to be the APIs to interact with the backend. And React Markdown is going to be the way that we render the Markdown. And we're going to allow the users to create Markdown. And right now, we're going to be using this new CMS within the admin panel for writing the Markdown, which you'll see in just a moment. So with that created, and we have our project here open in our text editor, we'll go ahead and open app.js and index.js. These are going to be the two files that we're going to be working with. And now we'll just jump back into our Amplify backend and wait for this to finish deploying. Once our backend has been deployed, we can go ahead and click on Open Admin UI to go ahead and create our data model. And the data model that we're going to be working with is going to be for a blogging app. So we'll have a post type, and the post will have a couple of fields for the content and the title of the post. So to go ahead and create that, we'll go over here and click on Content, and we'll click Create Data Model. For the data model, we'll click Add Model. The type is going to be a post. We will add a field for a title, and then we will add a field for content. And that's really all we need. This is not going to be an authorized API, so we don't have any way to kind of deal with user information at the moment. But since this is going to be public, we want to go ahead and maybe add some rules to allow people to only read and create, because we don't want anyone to be able to delete unless they are an admin here in the admin panel. So I'll go ahead and click on this post type itself, which will open up these options here. And for the rules, I'm going to uncheck update, and I'm going to uncheck delete. This way people can only create and read, and if you want to update and delete, you have to kind of be an admin. So to save and deploy this, I can go ahead and click on Save and Deploy, and then I'll click Deploy, and this will go ahead and deploy the backend. And once this is done deploying, we will go ahead and jump it back into our next app and start writing some code. Once the API has been deployed, we can now start interacting with it in our next app. So one interesting thing is that we can actually click here into local setup instructions and kind of see how to pull this app down into our next app. So there's two things we want to do. We want to go ahead and pull down the app itself, which is going to give us some ways to interact with the backend. And then we'll also have code snippets here for each model that we've created. In our example, we only have a post type. So here we can see operations for all of the different CRUD operations. So create, read, update, and delete. So the first thing I'll do is I'll click here and I'll go back to my terminal and I'll just paste that here. and this will say Amplify pull with the app ID and the environment name. And this allows us to then sign in if we were a different user. So let's say that we were a user that was outside of this actual original account. This would allow another developer to kind of come in and pull this app down. So once we do that, we can walk through the setup instructions. So I'll choose the text editor as Visual Studio Code, JavaScript, and React. For a Next app, the source directory is actually the root directory. So I'm going to change that from src to just the root, and then I can accept the rest of these defaults. And then next, I will be given the option to whether I want to modify this backend. So, it's up to you. But in this example, I'm just going to say no because my updates are going to be made through the admin UI. So after we've done that, we'll see that we have a couple of new things that have been pulled down. One is this models folder, and one is this AWS exports.js, both of which we will be using in just a moment. So let's go ahead and open our Next app, and we're going to go into app.js and configure Amplify. So typically, you would just import Amplify from AWS Amplify. You would import your configuration from the AWS exports file. In this example, it's actually going to be up one directory here in AWS exports. And then you would call amplify.configure, passing in the config. Now, in this example, though, since we're working with Next.js, we want to spread over the config. Whoops. And then we also want to set the SSR flag to true because we will be taking advantage of some SSR support by enabling fallback routes. So that is all you really need to do as far as the configuration process. When we're interacting with the APIs, we'll also see at how we can kind of make those APIs SSR aware in just a moment. Now, the next thing we might want to do is query for posts. So to do so, I'm going to go ahead and clear out a lot of this boilerplate here. And the thing I know that I'm going to need is going to be the APIs from React for managing state. So I'll go ahead and import those. So we'll go ahead and import from React. We're going to import use state and use effect. Whoops. So we have use state and use effect, and we're going to be working with an array of posts. So I might go ahead and create a posts array, and I'll have a set posts and set that to use state with an empty array. And then we'll have a use effect hook. And use effect is what we're going to be calling the API to go ahead and fetch those posts. Now, we'll have a function called fetch posts that we'll go ahead and create here. We'll make this async. And this is going to be where we interact with our backend. And then once we have our posts, we might say posts.map. And then for each post, we might return like a div. And we might have something like post.title. Now, what we're going to need to do is navigate to this post, and that's going to be how we kind of do the dynamic page generation. So to do that, and also just to actually drill down into a single item view for SSG, let's go ahead and import the link from NextLink. And then using the link, we can wrap our... Actually, we don't even need a div. We can just say an anchor tag. Whoops. And then we'll just wrap the anchor tag like this. And then for the link, we want to have an href, and this is going to be to the actual post that we're going to be working with. In this example, it's going to be something like /posts/ID. And I think we can just do something like post.id. And then this will allow us to kind of hyperlink to the posts. And of course, we don't have this post directory. We don't have this file yet. We're going to be creating that in just a moment. But we're kind of just setting up the main list of posts. So to kind of fetch these posts, let's go back into the Amplify admin. And I'm going to click on query here. And I'm going to copy the imports to my clipboard. And then I'm going to copy the actual query, and I'm going to paste it here into fetch posts. This is going to go ahead and fetch our posts. So I might call this like post data, and then I can call like set posts, passing in the post data. Now this is going to kind of set up our basic, loading. So the app's going to load, it's going to fetch the posts, it's going to then set the posts. And then the last thing we need to do is just invoke this function. So we'll call fetch post there. So, and I think we need to make sure that we're importing the post from the models directory one level up. So looks like we have all of that stuff set up properly. So the next thing we might want to do is just test this out. To do that, we'll go ahead and run npm start. Actually, we're going to run npm run dev since we're in the next app. And then we're going to go ahead and open up localhost 3000. Now, when the app loads, we see nothing, which is kind of right, because if we go back into our code, we will see that we are not displaying any UI at all. So the thing we might want to do is just have something like an H1 actually, like posts. And there we go. So now we need to kind of like add some data. So we can do that by going into the Amplify admin panel. So I might just move this over here. And I will go to our content. And I will click create post. And I might call this like post 1. And then for the content, I will actually edit this in markdown. I will say hello world. And then I might have a little bit of code here or whatever. And then we'll go ahead and say thanks for reading. And we'll go ahead and save this. And now if we refresh, we should see that we have our post. Now if we click on this, it's actually not going to do anything because we haven't created that page yet. But what we can also pretty easily add is actually the ability to do real-time updates. So if I go to the Amplify docs and I go to data store and I go to real-time, I can actually just use this line of code here to go ahead and add that. So I'm going to go ahead and we'll just add that just for the heck of it, but because it's pretty simple to add. I can say data store.observe, passing in the model that we'd like to observe. In this example, it's going to be the post. And then anytime a post is modified or created, then this function is going to fire. And then all we have to do is just call fetch posts again. So in 3 lines of code, we've added real-time functionality. So let's go ahead and save that and test it out. So to test this out, we will go ahead and create a new post. And then to make this a little more interesting, I might even go to dev.to and copy some markdown from one of my posts. This seems to be taking a little longer than usual. There we go. So I'll go ahead and just click edit. And then I'll maybe copy this. And then I will go back here and I will click edit and markdown. And there we go. We have a little bit more content there. And then I can go ahead and save this. And then what should happen is when we save this, we should see that show up in real time there. So let's save it. And there we go. We see it show up in real time. So we have the real time working. We have the basic query work. And the last thing we need to do is implement our static site implementation, which is going to be using get static props and get static paths, as well as a fallback route. And setting that up means we're going to need to create a couple new files, or maybe just one new file. So under pages, we'll create a new folder called posts. And this is going to be matching this route here. And then we're going to need to have a new file here called id.js. And this is going to be where we kind of have our component as well as our get static paths and get static props. So for the export, for the default export, we'll have this function called post component. That's going to be our main export. We're also going to have get static paths and get static props. So we'll have that. And then we're also going to go ahead and need to import some stuff. So I think we're going to need to import the model from posts, our post model. And I think this needs to actually go up one more directory. And then we're also going to need to import some APIs from Amplify. Now, what we did earlier was we imported data store directly from Amplify, but since we're going to be working with SSR, we need to actually make this component SSR aware. So to do that, we can import with SSR context. And depending on the API that you're working with, this will work with different, APIs within your system that you're working in. So for instance, if you're working with auth, it will take the identity of the caller when you're working with SSR context off of the session rather than local storage. In our example, since we're working with a data store, it's going to be reading the data from memory as opposed to reading it from IndexedDB. So we can see how this works in just a moment, but we need to go ahead and import that now. Let me think what else we're going to need. I think we're going to need use router from next router, because we're going to need to be implementing the fallback route, which is going to look something like, if I can go ahead and just paste some code here, something like this, where we're going to say we want to use the router, and then we want to say if the router is fallback, we want to return a loading indicator, and then if not, we're going to return our component. So let's go ahead and write that code. The component is going to look something like this. We're going to have our div. We might have an h1 with the post.title. Whoops. And then we're going to need our React markdown. So let's go ahead and import that. And I might just call this like markdown. And we can just say, okay, for our markdown, we can just render markdown. And then the children is going to be set to post.content. So where is this post coming from? The post is going to be passed in as a prop here. So when we work with get static props, we're going to be returning that post type. It'll be available here, and then we can kind of just render it there. So that's all we need as far as the actual component itself. We still haven't worked with any of this stuff yet here, so let's do that now. So when we're working with these APIs, we'll have like this argument coming in. We'll call it the request. And what we're going to basically need to do is, for Amplify to work, we're going to need to destructure data store off of the request using with SSR context. So what we're going to basically need to do is something like this. We're going to say const data store is equal to with SSR context passing in the request. And then we can now use data store here. So I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste that code there and there. And then for this for get static paths, we're going to need to return an object that looks kind of like this, where paths is an array, and each item in the array looks like something like this, where we have an object with the paths, with the params, and then the ID is going to be set to like something like post.id or something like that. So we need to have an array of paths that looks like that. So the way that we're going to do that is we're going to go ahead and say const posts is equal to, and we can actually copy this right here. We're going to await data store.query, passing in the post type, and then we're going to say const paths is equal to posts.map. And then for each item in this array, we want to return this object that has a params property with an ID set to post.id. And I think that's it. I think this will go ahead and it'll fetch the array of posts. We'll then create a new array of paths that is going to have a post ID set as the parameters property, and then we're just going to return those params here. And then finally, we're going to set fallback to true, meaning that we're going to build this statically, during the build phase. But if we create a new post, we can still access it dynamically, and it will create on demand. Next, we'll go ahead and jump into get static props. And from this function, we want to return an object that looks something like this. We want to have props, and then here we're going to have a post set to something. And then we also want to optionally maybe set revalidate. And if we want to do this, we can kind of set how many seconds we want to kind of refetch our data. So here what we want to do is make another call to data store, and we're also of course using with SSR context, and we need to go ahead and get the params off of the request. So we'll go ahead and get the params off of the request. We'll go ahead and get the ID off of the params, because the ID is what we're going to need to query data store. And then we're going to say const post is equal to data store dot query, passing in the post, and then the second argument is going to be the ID, and we need to make this async, so we'll say await. So we're having the ID coming from here, and we're going to call data store dot query, passing in the post, and the argument for the ID is ID. So now we're going to have the post that's going to be available here. So what we basically need to do now is return this. But the way that data store returns the data means we need to kind of deserialize it in a weird way. So I'm going to say json.parse, and then I'm going to say json.stringify, passing in the post. So this should allow us to go ahead and return that post, and then this post should be in the right format for us to read it here. So I'm going to save and go back to the browser, and we refresh, and we'll go ahead and click on a post. Oh, and there we go. We see that the post is rendering, and we're kind of like navigating to the post. It's kind of slow, so let's go ahead and try to run a build. So I'm going to say npm run build and npm start. And this way we'll kind of run a real build, and we'll see that it's faster. And then after this, we're going to test out our fallback route to kind of make sure that's working. So we'll give that a second to kind of build out, and then we'll give it a shot. And then we're also going to need to maybe create some new data in just a moment. So I'll go ahead and click create post, and I'll have like new post. And then we'll test that out in just a second. So it looks like our server is running now. So we'll go ahead and refresh. And now when we click on each post that we see, it's a lot faster. And if I go here and I create a new post, and then I create another new post, so we've created 2 new posts. And I should be able to navigate to these even though they were not part of the build. And everything is working as expected, which is good. So that's kind of it, really. That's really all I wanted to show off in this video. We kind of built a Next.js app using a lot of the Next.js APIs that a lot of people are really interested in, and we did that pretty fast. We built the backend on AWS using the new Amplify admin UI. We used data store, we used SSR support from Amplify. So we used a lot of different things, and we did so in a pretty short amount of time, and we got up and running pretty quickly. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned a lot. If you did, please share this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel, and keep an eye out for my future videos, and thank you for watching.